The promises we make to protect our hearts often become the very promises that change our lives. No one in Manhattan questioned Nathaniel Brooks when he made that vow. At 41, the white billionaire had everything people spent entire lifetimes chasing. A skyline penthouse overlooking the Hudson. A business empire valued in the billions. Magazine covers that called him America's most disciplined entrepreneur. Yet after losing his wife years earlier, he had quietly closed the door to love. Whenever friends, investors, or family tried to introduce him to someone new, he smiled politely and gave the same answer. If I ever marry again, it will only be the woman my son chooses. Most people assumed it was an impossible condition designed to end every conversation. 7-year-old Ethan Brooks barely spoke to strangers anymore. Since his mother's passing, the cheerful little boy had become quiet, careful, and almost invisible beside his father's larger-than-life reputation. Therapists called it grief. Teachers called it adjustment. Nathaniel simply called it heartbreak. On a cool October evening, father and son stepped into Bellamy House, one of Manhattan's most elegant restaurants. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors, while soft piano music floated through conversations about mergers, vacations, and million-dollar investments. Every employee recognized Nathaniel the moment he entered. Managers straightened their jackets. Guests whispered his name beneath lowered voices. Ethan noticed none of it. His curious brown eyes wandered across the dining room until they settled on someone almost everyone else overlooked. Maya Carter moved quietly between tables wearing a simple black server's uniform, carrying dinner plates with practiced grace. Her dark skin glowed beneath the golden lights, and although exhaustion rested gently beneath her eyes after a double shift, she greeted every guest with the same calm kindness. She smiled at an elderly couple. She bent slightly to help a little girl reach her dropped crayon. She thanked a dishwasher carrying heavy trays as though his work mattered just as much as anyone else's. She never realized someone was watching her every movement. Nathaniel was reviewing messages on his phone when he suddenly felt the empty space beside him. He looked up. Ethan was no longer standing there. Before anyone could react, the little boy crossed the dining room with slow, determined steps. The conversations around them faded into silence. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to waiting hands. Maya turned, surprised by the small figure standing before her. Without saying a single word, Ethan reached forward, wrapped his tiny hand around hers, looked back at his father with complete certainty, and whispered the words that made the entire restaurant forget how to breathe. "Daddy, I found her." Maya Carter blinked in surprise as the warmth of the little boy's hand rested gently in hers. For a heartbeat, she forgot the dinner tray balanced on her other arm, the conversations surrounding her, and the dozens of responsibilities waiting before the end of her shift. Ethan did not squeeze her hand tightly. He simply held it with quiet confidence, as though he had already made a decision that no adult could possibly understand. A soft murmur spread across the dining room. Guests exchanged curious glances. Some smiled. Others reached for their phones before thinking better of it. Nathaniel rose slowly from his chair, every movement controlled. Yet the confusion in his blue eyes could not be hidden. He had seen business rivals remain calm during billion-dollar negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for his own son walking away without hesitation to stand beside a complete stranger. "Ethan," he said gently, careful not to embarrass the boy. "Come back, son." Ethan looked at his father, then back at Maya. He quietly shook his head. Maya lowered herself to one knee so she could meet the child at eye level. Her voice remained soft enough that only those nearby could hear. "Hi there. My name is Maya. I think your dad is worried about you." Ethan studied her face for several silent seconds before answering with unexpected certainty. "You smiled at everyone." Maya looked puzzled. "I try to," he continued, speaking slowly, choosing every word with care. "Even the man washing dishes. Nobody smiles at him." Maya glanced toward the open kitchen where an older employee was stacking heavy trays. She remembered thanking him less than 5 minutes earlier because he had helped carry extra plates during the dinner rush. She had not thought anyone noticed, especially not a child. Nathaniel reached them and offered Maya an apologetic smile. "I am very sorry. He has never done anything like this before." There was genuine embarrassment in his voice, but there was also something else. Curiosity. Maya smiled warmly. "There is nothing to apologize for. He is being very polite." Ethan finally released her hand, but instead of returning immediately to his father, he reached into the pocket of his navy sweater. After a moment of searching, he pulled out a small folded paper crane. The edges were slightly bent from being carried everywhere. Without saying another word, he placed it carefully into Maya's hand. Nathaniel felt his breath catch. Ethan had folded that paper crane with his mother during one rainy afternoon nearly 3 years earlier. Since her passing, he had refused to let anyone touch it. Therapists had suggested it represented safety. Nathaniel himself had never been allowed to hold it for more than a few seconds. Yet now Ethan was giving it away freely. Maya examined the tiny paper bird with gentle admiration, unaware of its meaning. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Did you make it?" Ethan nodded once. "Mom helped." The smile on Maya's face became softer, touched not by surprise but by respect. She held the little crane as though it were worth more than diamonds. And in that quiet moment Nathaniel realized his son was not asking anyone to notice wealth, success, or reputation. He was watching to see who recognized the value of something far smaller, and somehow, without trying, Maya Carter had passed a test no one even knew existed. Maya carefully placed the tiny paper crane inside the front pocket of her apron, as though it belonged there all along. "I will keep it safe until dinner is over," she promised with a gentle smile. Ethan seemed satisfied. He gave one small nod before finally walking back beside his father, but something had already changed. The invisible wall he usually kept between himself and the rest of the world had cracked, if only by a few inches. Nathaniel watched every detail without fully understanding what he had just witnessed. He had spent years studying markets, negotiating contracts, and reading people whose fortunes depended on every expression they revealed. Yet his own son remained the greatest mystery he had ever faced. Since the day Ethan lost his mother, every specialist had encouraged patience. They said trust could not be forced. It had to grow naturally. Tonight, for reasons no report or diagnosis could explain, trust had appeared in the form of a waitress carrying dinner plates through a crowded restaurant. Maya excused herself politely and returned to work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She refilled water glasses before anyone had to ask. She remembered each guest's order without writing a single note. When a nervous young busboy accidentally stacked dessert forks in the wrong place, she quietly helped him fix the table before the customers noticed. She never corrected him with embarrassment. She simply smiled and whispered, "We all have first days, even if they are not today." The young man smiled back with visible relief. Nathaniel noticed that too. It was becoming impossible not to. The restaurant manager approached their table a few minutes later with an uneasy expression. "Mr. Brooks, I sincerely apologize if there was any disruption to your evening." Nathaniel looked toward Maya, who was now helping an elderly woman carefully fold her coat over the back of a chair before returning to another table. "There was no disruption," he answered calmly. "In fact, I believe your staff handled everything with remarkable professionalism." The manager blinked, clearly surprised. Compliments from Nathaniel Brooks were far less common than headlines suggested. Across the dining room, Ethan quietly tugged on his father's sleeve. "Can she bring our dinner?" Nathaniel lowered his eyes toward his son. "Would you like Maya to be our server?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Please." It was such a simple request, yet it carried unusual weight. Ethan rarely asked for anything beyond books, puzzles, or quiet afternoons at the park. Nathaniel signaled discreetly to the manager, who quickly arranged the table assignments without interrupting the flow of service. A few minutes later Maya approached with warm bread resting inside a linen basket. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "The chef asked me to let you know your entrees will be ready in about 10 minutes. Ethan looked up at her with quiet admiration. "You remembered us." Maya smiled softly. "Of course I did. Some guests leave a bigger impression than others." Nathaniel expected his son to return to silence, but instead Ethan asked the first spontaneous question he had heard in months. "Do you always notice everyone?" Maya paused for only a second before answering. "I try my best. Sometimes people are hoping someone will notice them, even if they never say a word." Nathaniel felt those words settle into the silence between them with unexpected weight, because deep inside he wondered whether she had just described his son, or perhaps, without realizing it, she had also described him. Maya's answer lingered in Nathaniel's mind long after she stepped away to serve another table. "Some people are hoping someone will notice them, even if they never say a word." He watched Ethan quietly tear a piece of warm bread into careful little squares instead of eating immediately. That had become another habit after his mother's passing. He always prepared the food first, as though waiting for someone else to join him. Nathaniel had noticed it countless times but had never found the right words to ask why. Tonight, Ethan simply looked toward the dining room until Maya passed by again, then finally took his first bite with a faint smile. It was a smile so small that most people would have missed it. Nathaniel did not. He had been waiting years to see it return. As dinner continued, Maya never lingered longer than necessary. She remained completely professional, treating their table with the same attention she gave every other guest. She recommended the chef's seasonal salmon to an anniversary couple celebrating 40 years together. She patiently explained the dessert menu to a family visiting from Ohio. She thanked the pianist after he finished a quiet rendition of an old jazz standard. Every interaction seemed effortless, yet none of it appeared rehearsed. There was an authenticity that could not be trained. During a brief pause between courses, an elderly gentleman at the neighboring table struggled to read the menu under the dim evening lights. Before anyone called for assistance, Maya quietly retrieved a small reading lamp from the hostess station and placed it beside him. "This should make things a little easier," she said with an encouraging smile. The man laughed softly. "You noticed before I even asked." Maya shrugged gently. "Sometimes people ask with their eyes before they ask with words." Nathaniel looked down at his water glass, reflecting on how many meetings he had attended where everyone spoke endlessly without truly seeing one another. Across the table, Ethan had been watching the same moment unfold. He leaned toward his father and whispered, "She always knows." Nathaniel turned to him. "Knows what?" Ethan thought carefully before answering. "Who needs help?" The simple observation unsettled him more than any complicated explanation could have. Children often notice patterns adults ignored, and Ethan had been quietly studying Maya since the moment they entered the restaurant. Nathaniel suddenly realized his son had not been captivated by her appearance or even her kindness alone. He had been observing consistency. Every person who crossed Maya's path received the same respect, whether they wore an expensive suit, a kitchen apron, or a janitor's uniform. Nothing about her changed depending on who stood in front of her. As dessert arrived, Maya carefully removed the folded paper crane from her apron pocket and placed it beside Ethan's plate with both hands. "I promised I would keep it safe," she said. "Now it belongs back with its owner." Ethan looked at the little paper bird but did not pick it up. Instead, he gently pushed it back across the table toward Maya. "You keep it tonight," he said quietly. "It is happier with you." Maya looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded with complete certainty. Nathaniel watched the exchange in silence, unable to explain why his chest suddenly felt lighter. For the first time in years, his son was not holding tightly to the past. He was choosing to share something precious with another human being, and somehow that simple act carried more hope than every therapy session, every business success, and every promise Nathaniel had made to protect the small family he had left. Maya accepted the little paper crane with both hands, not because she wished to keep it, but because she understood that refusing a sincere gift from a child could sometimes close a door that trust had only begun to open. "Then I will take very good care of it until we meet again," she said softly. Ethan smiled, a little brighter than before, and returned to his dessert. Nathaniel noticed the difference immediately. The guarded expression that had become so familiar over the past 3 years had relaxed. It was subtle, a calmer posture, easier breathing, eyes that wandered around the room instead of remaining fixed on the table. No financial report had ever captured his attention the way those tiny changes did. As the evening slowly came to an end, Maya placed the check on the table with the same quiet professionalism she had shown every guest throughout the night. "There is no rush," she said warmly. "Please enjoy the rest of your evening." Nathaniel looked up at her. "Miss Carter." She paused politely. "Yes, Mr. Brooks?" "Thank you." The words surprised even him. They were not spoken out of courtesy. They carried genuine gratitude. Maya smiled with quiet humility. "You are very welcome. It was a pleasure serving your family." She walked away before another sentence could be exchanged because another table had just arrived, and they deserved the same attention. Nathaniel watched her greet the new guests with the exact same warmth she had offered everyone else. There was no special treatment, no attempt to impress him after recognizing his name. She had remained exactly the same person from beginning to end. That consistency stayed with him long after he signed the receipt. Outside, the October air felt cool against the city lights. Yellow taxis rolled through the streets while distant sirens blended into the rhythm of Manhattan at night. Ethan climbed into the back seat of the waiting sedan, but before Nathaniel closed the door, the little boy quietly asked, "Can we come back?" Nathaniel looked at him with gentle surprise. "To this restaurant?" Ethan nodded. "She said we might meet again." Nathaniel smiled for the first time that evening without forcing it. "If you would like that, then yes." During the drive home, Ethan did something he had not done since his mother was alive. He rested his head against his father's shoulder instead of looking silently out the window. Nathaniel remained perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might disturb the fragile peace settling between them. The city lights reflected across the glass as father and son rode through the quiet streets together. Back inside Bellamy House, Maya finally finished her shift close to midnight. She changed into a simple denim jacket, picked up her worn canvas bag, and reached into the pocket of her apron one last time. The tiny paper crane was still there. She smiled gently before placing it inside a small notebook she carried everywhere, protecting it between the pages. She had no idea who Nathaniel Brooks really was beyond being a courteous customer with a thoughtful son. She certainly did not know that one simple evening had already begun changing the course of another family's future. To her, it had simply been another reminder that children often saw goodness long before adults learned how to look for it. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brooks Tower, but Nathaniel barely noticed the breathtaking view stretching across Manhattan. His calendar was filled with board meetings, investment briefings, and interviews, yet his thoughts kept returning to an ordinary restaurant and an extraordinary waitress who had treated every person with exactly the same quiet respect. Across the breakfast table, Ethan slowly ate a bowl of oatmeal while the paper crane's absence from his pocket did not seem to trouble him in the slightest. That alone caught Nathaniel's attention. Usually, his son checked for it several times every morning. Today, he simply looked peaceful. "Do you miss it?" Nathaniel asked gently. Ethan looked up. "The crane." Nathaniel nodded. Ethan smiled into his glass of orange juice. "It is where it needs to be." Nathaniel hesitated before asking the question that had stayed with him since the night before. "How did you know?" Ethan tilted his head. "Know what? How did you know she was different?" The little boy thought quietly, searching for words that could explain something he had never learned from adults. "Everybody looked at you," he finally said. "She looked at everyone else." The answer settled over the room with surprising weight. Nathaniel replayed every moment from the restaurant in his mind. Ethan was right. Maya had never once tried to impress the wealthiest customer in the room. She had not lingered at their table longer than necessary. She had not asked personal questions or mentioned his company. She had simply done what she believed was right for every person who crossed her path. That afternoon, Nathaniel found himself doing something he almost never did. He asked his executive assistant to postpone 2 non-essential meetings. "Is everything all right?" she asked with visible concern. Nathaniel offered a thoughtful smile. "Everything is fine. I simply need to see something with my own eyes." He did not tell anyone where he was going. Later that evening, instead of arriving during the dinner rush, Nathaniel entered Bellamy House just before the restaurant opened. There were no photographers, no crowded dining room, and no business associates. Employees were quietly preparing tables while soft music drifted through the nearly empty space. Hidden behind a row of decorative plants near the entrance, Nathaniel watched without introducing himself. Maya had not noticed him. She was helping arrange fresh flowers on each table before carrying 2 cups of coffee toward the kitchen. A dishwasher whose hands trembled slightly accepted one of the cups with grateful surprise. Maya laughed softly at something he said, and both returned to work with brighter expressions. A few minutes later, she adjusted the chair at an empty table because one leg wobbled slightly. Then she stopped to polish fingerprints from a window that no customer had yet seen. No manager was watching. No wealthy guest was present. No reward waited for her kindness. She behaved exactly the same way she had the night before, because it was not an act. Standing silently near the entrance, Nathaniel realized he was witnessing something rarer than success. He was watching character, and for the first time in many years, he understood why his son had recognized it before anyone else. For several days, Nathaniel told himself that what he had seen inside Bellamy House was only a coincidence. A single evening could not reveal the truth about a person's character. Yet the memory refused to fade. Between meetings, he caught himself thinking about the waitress who had thanked a dishwasher with the same sincerity she offered a billionaire. Late one afternoon, he made a quiet phone call, not to investigate her wealth, her family, or anything meant to invade her privacy, but to learn whether the kindness he had witnessed was real or simply the polished professionalism of an excellent employee. The restaurant manager answered with obvious respect. Nathaniel asked only one question. Has Maya Carter always been like this? There was a brief silence before the manager laughed softly. Since her first day, she is the one new employees look for when they feel overwhelmed. She stays late when someone has a family emergency. She remembers birthdays without writing them down. We have tried promoting her twice, but she always says she is happy serving people until the right time comes. Nathaniel thanked him and ended the call, but curiosity continued pulling him forward. A few days later, he visited a small neighborhood coffee shop several blocks away from Bellamy House after finishing an early meeting. He had no expectation of seeing Maya there. It simply happened. Through the front window, he noticed her sitting alone near the corner with a stack of library books spread across the table. Beside her sat an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. Maya patiently helped her read through a collection of medical forms, explaining every page with calm encouragement. There were no cameras, no wealthy customers, no audience to admire her generosity. When the paperwork was finished, Maya laughed at something her grandmother whispered, folded the documents neatly into a folder, and wrapped both hands around a simple cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. Nathaniel remained across the street for only a moment before quietly walking away. He felt almost guilty for witnessing such an ordinary, private act of devotion. That evening, he found Ethan building a puzzle in the living room. Without looking up, the little boy asked, "Did you see her again?" Nathaniel stopped in surprise. "How did you know I went?" Ethan placed another puzzle piece into position. "Because you wanted to know what I already knew." Nathaniel sat beside his son, studying the nearly completed picture. "And what do you know?" Ethan smiled gently. "She is the same person everywhere." Those simple words settled deep inside Nathaniel's heart. Business had taught him that most people adjusted themselves depending on who was watching. Success often rewarded appearances. Influence often rewarded performance. Yet true character existed only when nobody expected applause. Maya had never tried to become remarkable. She simply chose, again and again, to be kind in moments that no one else considered important. As evening shadows stretched across the apartment, Nathaniel walked to the window overlooking the city skyline. For years, he had believed his promise depended on the impossible judgment of a grieving child. Now he began to wonder whether Ethan had never been searching for perfection at all. Perhaps his son had simply been waiting for someone whose heart remained exactly the same whether standing before ordinary people or extraordinary ones. 1 week later, Nathaniel made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of arranging another chance encounter or relying on quiet observations from a distance, he chose honesty. On a calm Thursday evening, he returned to Bellamy House with Ethan, not as the head of a global company, but simply as a father hoping to understand the person who had restored a small piece of his son's joy. When Maya approached their table, genuine surprise crossed her face before settling into her familiar warm smile. "Welcome back," she said. "It is good to see both of you again." Ethan smiled immediately. "You still have it?" Maya reached into the pocket of her apron and carefully unfolded the small notebook she always carried. Inside, protected between two blank pages, rested the tiny paper crane. It had not been crushed or faded. It looked exactly as Ethan remembered. "I promised I would keep it safe," she said softly. Ethan's eyes brightened with quiet happiness. Nathaniel watched the exchange before finally speaking. "May I ask you something that has been on my mind for several days?" Maya nodded. "Of course." Nathaniel hesitated, searching for words that sounded less like an interview and more like the truth. "How do you notice people so easily? You seem to understand what they need before they ask." Maya looked down at the little paper crane for a moment before answering. "My grandmother always told me that everyone is carrying something invisible. Some carry loneliness. Some carry fear. Some carry hope that nobody else can see. You never know which one it is, so the safest choice is to treat every person with kindness." Nathaniel remained silent. There was no dramatic speech, no attempt to sound wise. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone repeating a lesson she had lived every day. Ethan gently reached across the table and placed his small hand over his father's. "Daddy," he whispered, "this is what I wanted you to hear." Nathaniel looked at his son, then back at Maya. In that simple moment, he understood something that years of success had never taught him. Ethan had never been choosing a wife for his father. He had been recognizing the kind of heart that had once filled their home, a kindness he feared had disappeared forever after his mother's passing. Nathaniel felt gratitude replace the emptiness he had carried for so long, and for the first time since making that impossible promise years earlier, he no longer wondered whether it could ever come true. Instead, he found himself wondering whether fate had quietly begun fulfilling it the very night a little boy reached for the hand that everyone else had overlooked. The seasons changed quietly after that evening, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through small moments that slowly became part of everyday life. Nathaniel and Ethan returned to Bellamy House often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes only for dessert, and each visit ended with conversations that lasted a little longer than the one before. Maya never treated them differently from any other guest. She still greeted every customer with the same gentle smile, still thanked every coworker by name, and still carried the little paper crane inside her notebook as a reminder that the smallest acts of trust could become the beginning of something extraordinary. One crisp spring afternoon, Nathaniel invited Maya and her grandmother to join him and Ethan for a walk through Central Park. There were no reporters, no photographers, and no carefully planned speeches. Children laughed near the lake while families shared blankets beneath flowering trees. Ethan ran ahead with a kite, laughing freely in a way his father had not heard in years. Maya watched him with quiet joy. "He seems lighter," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "He is, and so am I." They stood in comfortable silence until Ethan came running back, holding the familiar paper crane. "I think it belongs with all of us now," he said. He unfolded the notebook, placed the little crane between Maya's hand and his father's hand, then gently closed their fingers around it together. Neither adult spoke. There was nothing to add to a moment that already carried every answer. Months later, in a small ceremony attended by close friends, family, and the people who had quietly shaped their journey, Nathaniel fulfilled the promise he had once believed impossible. He did not speak about wealth, success, or destiny. Instead, he looked at Maya with gratitude and said, "The greatest decision of my life was not made in a boardroom. It began the day my son recognized the goodness that I had almost forgotten how to see." Ethan smiled proudly from the front row, knowing that he had never chosen someone because of status or appearance. He had simply trusted the honesty of a heart that treated every person with equal kindness. Long after the celebration ended, the tiny paper crane rested inside a glass frame in their home, not as a symbol of perfection, but as a reminder that healing often begins with one gentle choice, one unnoticed act of compassion, and one child brave enough to reach for the hand that everyone else overlooked. Some people spend their lives searching for extraordinary miracles, only to discover that the quietest hearts have been changing the world all along.